Okay, great. We're going to go ahead and get started, and then those who join, that's fine. We also are recording this, so afterwards, if you have a colleague that you are interested in viewing this, we will have this posted somewhere on Instagram or Facebook, likely for the Spins account, or you can reach out directly to me or to Sean Bell. So thank you today for joining our Spins webinar regarding, are you ready for the holidays? Is that ever a loaded question? Well, we are ready. We are ready for the holidays. We are ready to help you think about and plan for the holidays as it relates to retail and as it relates really to how the customers are changing and how customers' habits are changing. And so today I have two special guests with me. I have Jeff Crumpton, who is a manager in our analytics team, as well as Sean Bell McDermott, who is also going to co-lead the webinar. We will have Q&A at the end, and so if you are interested in asking a question, please just click on the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, and I will actually get to see those questions. So please, I encourage you to ask questions along the way. I'll be gathering those. And without further ado, here we go. Are you ready for the holidays?
Thanks, Dawn. We're really excited to share data on this upcoming holiday season, recognizing that most of our retailers have likely planned assortment and promotions for some time. We're going to focus on what will be different for the upcoming season. I'll be talking about where customers will be shopping and how to support an omnichannel experience with data, while Jeff will speak to how shopper behavior has changed and what to expect in terms of trends this year.
First, it's important to understand where we began so that we can start to understand where we're going. If you see the Thanksgiving and Christmas bumps for 2019, this type of seasonality is fairly familiar for you. We track it every single year. The defining event for 2020 was the dramatic rise in sales that we saw. We talk about either stockpiling or panic buying, which is specifically that week of 3/15 and 3/22. It's interesting to see how the role of regional grocers here in orange has played and how their sales peaked 1 week later than the other two channels on 3/22. On the backside of the stockpiling event, we can observe that purchase behavior has remained elevated versus the 2019 rates. And we all know that dining in restaurants has declined, so consumers are purchasing more products in store to meet those consumption needs. It's also interesting to see the role that regional and natural players play within these particular sales trends. We know that, for example, regional grocers are in many ways the backbone of their communities. And here we can see that consumers continue to turn to them in their time of greatest need. And we can infer a lot about what we don't see here, specifically the usual bump in sales for Memorial Day or the 4th of July. It's fairly flat compared to last year. Knowing that this part of 2020, there was still some uncertainty around COVID-19 cases, and that local, state, and federal officials were cautioning people from hosting large events and cookouts. There were sporadic reopenings across the country, and we can see that concern in consumer purchase behavior here. As we move into late summer and early fall, we see a sales increase for Labor Day as regions start to open back up. But what does this tell us about our Q4 holidays this year? We can expect shoppers to remain cautious about how they celebrate key holidays, and we can see the outsized role that regional grocers play in this effort. In short, we know that the 2020 holidays at the end of the year will be vastly different. Measuring growth rates compared to last year is a pretty common way to determine performance gains. But what it fails to establish is how that compares to a baseline rate. Comparing each category to the total store growth establishes a useful index value so that we can determine categories that punch well above their weight. Having set the stage, now let's look at how natural and regional grocers can help us understand consumer motivations and do a little bit of prediction into the future. These natural and regional grocers are at the forefront of innovation and product incubation. And by looking at the top categories by each holiday, we can start to see those trends which shine through. Thanksgiving and Christmas 2019 are our baseline here. These holiday baskets show us what consumers prioritized last year, Plant-based meat alternatives, for example, were already a hot trend. And we can see the usual categories that you would expect to see when families and friends come together to celebrate. The stockpiling event here in purple is all about pantry prepping and nutrient density. It's not surprising that all of these categories are shelf stable and that consumers purchase these categories not knowing how long they would have to quarantine. So now let's look at the key holidays that mark summer 2020. We can see that consumers are still prioritizing safety measures. First aid and therapeutics, really hand sanitizers, are a common category throughout these three major holidays. Hard cider and spirits still mark the way that consumers celebrate the holidays, but have increased due to higher alcohol consumption throughout the pandemic. Plant-based meat alternatives still index high. And it's interesting to see that consumers started to move back into refrigerated categories since they still have full pantries at home. Frozen fruits and vegetables index quite high as consumers are opting for products with longer shelf lives. With these categories in mind, it would be helpful to make some predictions on what we'd expect through the end of the year.
Jeff, jumping in there, especially looking at the 4th of July and Labor Day data, it's really interesting to highlight that holiday baskets we're seeing so far in the pandemic are really a blend of both the expected more specialty holiday items and also some of those more basic items and shelf-stable items that have been driven during the pandemic. I know we were talking about a Wall Street Journal article recently that referenced how retailers are already putting together COVID packets to really make sure that as we head into the winter and the holiday season, not only prepared with the typical holiday items, but also the basics that we're expecting to see as part of shopper baskets this holiday season.
As consumers think about the 2020 holidays, the way they celebrate these will indeed be a much smaller affair. Recent CDC guidance has suggested that families do not travel long distances, and for groups that do gather, that they should be kept to a smaller size. These precautions would aid in keeping the virus from spreading. But for consumers eager to maintain their holiday traditions, how they celebrate will be similar, but may consist of more frequent, smaller events. Friendsgiving and smaller family dinners leading up to the holiday may very well see an increase as consumers look for ways to normalize this rather abnormal time. Now let's go back to our 2019 holidays, and this time look through the lens of an eating occasion attribute. This attribute looks at the overt claims that brands highlight on the packaging of their products to tell consumers if there is a specific meal or eating occasion that meal is focused around. For Thanksgiving, which is at the top row of numbers, cocktail foods and desserts index quite high at 205 and 180. But those rank lower for Christmas. And for Christmas, lunch and dinner plate and lunch and dinner entree rank the highest of the eating occasions at 155 and 142. But the converse is true for Thanksgiving. There is a notable difference between the two holidays, and this difference can help us inform consumer intent for retailers. It should be noted that we're using UPC products, and this does not include fresh departments like meat, bakery, deli, or produce departments. In the next few slides, Sean Bell will walk us through some ideas of how retailers can implement the power of attribution to engage with their customers. So what trends were important in 2019 and how did they hold up in 2020? Here again, we're using our dollar growth index to compare the top 5 attribute growth so that we can compare that to total store. Grain-free and paleo positioned for Thanksgiving and Christmas were the top 2 attributes. Grain-free had a whopping 964 growth index for Thanksgiving and 525 index for Christmas. In the second spot, paleo position was 723 for Thanksgiving and 450 for Christmas. Plant-based, which we've already talked about being a hot trend, was third at 392 and 280. for Thanksgiving and Christmas respectively. Now, if we look at Labor Day 2020, we can see that grain-free is still hot, but that paleo-positioned and plant-based positioned products are now the #1 and 2. We've talked a lot about plant-based over the last year, and while the overall growth is still a hot trend, paleo-positioned products exceed that growth at 303. Going into Thanksgiving and Christmas for 2020, we still expect these attributes to perform well, along with grain-free, pasture-raised, and allergen-friendly. In short, consumers are still prioritizing health and wellness products and sticking with items that align to their deeply held beliefs. And now Sean Bell will dive into some fascinating data around e-com and consumers.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. So digging into data on where customers are shopping, you can see the data on this slide demonstrates the channel shifting we've seen since March. And called out in yellow, you can see that e-commerce is up almost 200%. This is not surprising given that industry projections estimate that e-com will account for about 21% of total grocery sales in 5 years. The SPINS data confirms that that behavior is here to stay, and we don't really expect to see the channel distribution go back to where it was pre-pandemic. The retail investment in e-commerce, both click and collect and delivery, has really improved the customer experience so much that we're now seeing about an estimation of 90% of shoppers will continue to use e-commerce going forward in some capacity after the pandemic. So with this kind of acceleration, the question for retailers really isn't if or when to invest in e-commerce, but how to effectively compete and win in e-commerce. And that's what we're going to cover in the next few slides. So moving into the next slide. This question on how to effectively compete and win in e-commerce becomes especially critical because initial data indicates that customer loyalty is not consistent across channels. So a recent Mercatus study discovered that the significant growth we've seen in e-commerce has actually been driven in part by shoppers who are trying a new retailer. In other words, e-commerce represents a huge opportunity for retailers both to gain new customers, but also potentially lose existing customers, and that trend will last post the pandemic as we see continued growth in e-commerce. So the question then becomes, how can we help our retail partners retain their existing customers, but also gain new customers going forward? And the answer that we've seen is that an omni-channel experience and personalization are very critical in this space. The retailers that we've worked with to help them extend their in-store experience online are the ones we see really winning in this space. And a big part of that is making sure you know your customers, and especially the customers that are going online. Yeah, so moving into the next slide. While millennials represent the largest consumer group and are thought of as being digitally native, what we've seen with COVID is that non-digitally native consumers have been forced online and forced to adopt e-commerce. The Mercatus data that you see on this slide indicates that they're actually the largest share of home delivery users. So this forced transition for non-digitally native consumers is one of the reasons that it's so critical for retailers to really extend their in-store experience online if they want to retain shoppers. In many cases, what we've seen is those loyal brick and mortar shoppers have to rely on e-commerce now. And the data is demonstrating that if their first experience online isn't a positive one, there's a very high likelihood that they'll actually look to a competitor going forward to fulfill their curbside or delivery orders. The good news is that retailers can use one strategy to really win across the different shopper segments across channels. And that's very much so enabling technology that enhances your customer's experience. When surveyed, the primary request that shoppers had in terms of e-commerce experience is more personalization, and specifically the ability to filter on site to really personalize and customize the assortment that they're viewing. So Jeff spoke earlier to how customer shopping behavior has changed. Pulling that through to the next slide, because we see that customers are making fewer trips, and throughout COVID, the basket size has really increased, they've also become much more intentional in how they're shopping, much more thought going into that, maybe one trip a week as opposed to having multiple trips a week. And the impact of that when we look to e-commerce is that searchability and discoverability are now more important than ever before. At Spins, we have the privilege of working with a lot of really innovative natural and regional retailers who are doing amazing things to really support their customers through this time. And their customers have very high expectations and really appreciate the curated assortment that those innovative retailers bring. The challenge that we've been working with them to solve is applying that curated custom assortment to e-commerce. I included on this slide a quote from a recent Inc. report that I really feel speaks to this challenge. And this quote says that the retailer with the widest selection and reasonable prices is where customers are going to shop first. However, having a large selection of products can be problematic if people can't easily find what they're looking for on site. And I think that pretty much sums up the challenge that a lot of retailers are experiencing when they go to e-commerce and really push for that omni-channel experience. Online, a large assortment can very quickly become frustrating unless the experience is personalized. So when we work with retailers, we're really working with them to make sure they set up filters and search as tools that their customers are delighted by this large assortment rather than frustrated when they go to site. So moving into the next slide, how is that going to impact the 2020 holidays, and how can we project what the end of the year will look like? Holidays typically have been a time of discovery. So they're actually exacerbating that searchability and discoverability element, and that when we look at data from natural retailers in 2019, and this is what Jeff walked us through a few slides ago, we really see that that element of discovery pulls through, and that plant-based meats were ranked highest during those holiday weeks in 2019. So applying that to 2020, knowing that shoppers will be online, it becomes really important to enable shoppers to easily find items that they're looking for. When we look to our Spins partnerships, what we're doing with our retail partners is using our attribute data to first help them understand which diets and lifestyles are most important to their customers, and then providing them with the data to easily set up those filters on site. So that's what you see on the right-hand side of this slide.
And we know that people will reach for new or different items during this holiday season, specifically attributes like paleo, plant-based, and grain-free products. And those seeking or avoiding products based on their diet and lifestyle needs are a great way for retailers to deploy those attributes.
Absolutely, and pulling it through to what can you expect to see if you're pulling through filters or search to your site? In terms of ROI, what we see is an increase in conversion of 15% when you apply filters to grocery. And that increase really speaks to the improvement in the experience of the customer. For example, I think everyone has had the experience when they go to shop online of typing in plant-based meat, and one of the first results you get back is, meat, regular meat, non-plant-based, as a search result. So what we're really working to do with our retail partners is eliminate that challenge and providing them with the data to power custom search and also power filters on site for that customer experience. So moving through to the next slide, Jeff kicked us off by talking about how shoppers have changed both in their preferences, which attributes you can expect to see over-indexing this holiday season, and also how they're shopping. So we know they're making fewer trips with larger basket sizes. Tying that through to where they're going to be shopping, knowing that this holiday season will be more omni-channel than ever before, it's really critical that retailers prepare for an influx of customers, not just in store, but also online. So making sure that the sites are set up to serve an influx of customers online, but also that the sites are really easy to use, especially understanding that a majority of those online shoppers are non-digitally native and may be using your e-commerce functionality for the first time. So really meeting them where they are, understanding what they're looking for and how they're going to shop for it so that they can enjoy shopping online just as much as they would enjoy shopping in store.
So what did we learn here today? If we're thinking about how to be successful in this approach, what are the key tenets to think about? We think about these as the 4 Ps to guide your holiday strategy.
Yeah, so first and foremost, talking about place, a key understanding is that e-commerce is absolutely a necessity heading into the 2020 holidays, but it's also a great opportunity for retailers to explore new partnerships to really differentiate their online experience and building an omni-channel strategy so that they're able not just to retain the customers that they have that are really delighted by their in-store experience, but also gain new customers who are introduced to them perhaps for the first time through their e-commerce offering.
I think it's also important to understand that the changes that we witness here don't stop at the end of the year. COVID won't magically go away as we move into 2021, so the fundamentals are the same, so let them be your guide. If we think about product, stay aware of overall trends undergirding the market. Enable this easy filtering based on attributes within your e-com platform solutions, and honestly expect the unexpected. If we're thinking about price, consumers will continue to experience budget pressures. Understand that price is a big lever to enable store shift from your store to one of your competitors. And people, they are truly your greatest asset. Their product experience and their familiarity with loyal customers are a main driver for customers that keep coming back. Recognize your role as a natural or regional grocer as a trusted source for these loyal customers. And with that, I'm going to transition everything back over to Dawn to take some questions from the group.
Great. Thank you guys so much. There's a lot of really rich insight and data. I know you probably boiled that down from a lot of other data slides and reports, if I know you, Jeff, and Sean Bell as well. We did have a couple questions come in, so I will go ahead and ask those to you. They came in through my Q&A chat through being a panelist. And then it'll give us just a few extra minutes in case anyone else in the webinar today has any questions. Go ahead and shoot those to me either in the chat or the Q&A. So Sean Bell, I'm going to give you the first question. Someone was saying, you know, those attributes that you showed that are diet related, that kind of were like paleo and so on and so forth. Those were some really cool insights to be able to identify the food and how folks are buying food. How confident are you in the products that are in those buckets? When you understand your product groups, such as something a little bit more skeptical as like what's in paleo, how confident are you guys in the data you showed today?
Oh, absolutely confident. It's something that Jeff and I have really been digging into as we think about the 2020 holidays, and it's trends that we've continued to see grow not only from the previous year, but also since COVID hit. We've really seen a surge in the over-index of consumers who are shopping even more aligned with those diet and lifestyle attributes. So really seeing an increase in the health-minded consumer, not just within maybe more traditional spaces where you would expect to see them, like a more innovative natural retailer, but really across the board and across the channels, seeing growth in those attribute-driven lifestyles. Jeff, anything to add on that one?
I was just going to say, Jeff, would you? Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in many ways, if we're thinking about the kind of the attributes that we've highlighted today, there is this increased focus of food as immunity, food as wellness, food as medicine. And so a lot of times you see consumers reaching for these products because the uncertainty means that they're looking to turn to a product that they know that they can trust and that there's a source of trust there. That's why I feel like that we see plant-based. That's why folks did not abandon kind of their diet and lifestyle in the midst of a pandemic. If anything, they doubled down on it. I think that's important to understand because even with the last recession, compared to this recession, we still saw people reaching for organic food, for natural food. And so I think that this all kind of falls within kind of that larger umbrella of natural and organic. These are just kind of subsets of it, and it speaks to the innovation that we see in the channel and just the desire for people to continue to maintain some sense of wellness in the midst of all the chaos.
Right. A second question that we had come in, thank you. I'll start with you, Jeff, this time, and then Sean Bell, if you have anything you want to add. As you looked at trends, we look at trends, every day here at Spins, and the differences regarding attributes online versus in store. So, you did highlight some really high numbers there, Jeff, as you looked at that, and then Sean Bell went into some of the engagement we're seeing online. Is there anything that's jumping out to you as being something that's being particularly heightened in the online environment, or are really you just seeing kind of all attributes really increasing in certain ways? And Sean Bell, you can jump in secondarily.
Yeah, what I would say is that I think the Mercatus study really kind of spoke to part of this. Consumers in store versus an e-com click and collect. It really depends on availability of product in store. So if they're looking for their normal items in their basket, if they can't find it, in store, then they're looking for it online. If they can't find it at your store, they're going someplace else. And so this, I think the Mercatus study also talked about the idea that consumers were, from a loyalty standpoint, there is no loyalty to online, that there is not that connection with a brick and mortar store. And so those types of products that have moved online, it's almost kind of because they can't find it someplace else. And so having it as part of your assortment is important. My own sort of experience, cleaning products, sometimes I would resort to buying those online if I couldn't find them someplace else. But when it comes to things like immunity, vitamins, and supplements, they still turn to their trusted source. They're still turning to stores. And while they may find some of those online, I think that if there are questions, they're still going to try to engage with, their trusted resource in store to be able to answer those questions. And so that's why I feel like brick and mortar is still so important, and that online is an important part of it, but it doesn't replace, it only adds to.
Right. Could you go ahead and click to the next slide, and then Sean Bell, if you want to go ahead and.
Yeah, I was going to say just one thing to add to build on that, speak to what Jeff said, is going back to the data point we referenced earlier of, when we add filters to an e-commerce site, what we see is a 15% increase in conversion. And the reason I reference that is because I really think it speaks to the intentionality that consumers are bringing to their shopping now, and especially to their e-commerce shopping. So understanding that, preference will really be diverse across channels, across different stores and banners, that across the board, what we're seeing is consumers are very intentional in their online shopping. And so really facilitating an online experience that allows them to be intentional is going to drive success.
Great. Well, I think we are about a minute out from wrapping up our half hour. For those of you who joined today, thank you. We definitely were just giving you a taste today. This is something that we do every single day here at Spins, using our attributes, using our online partners, and also just really looking at trends over time. I think knowing what to expect and having a bit of that crystal ball is something that we all want. As far as we're concerned, data is your crystal ball. If we were, for example, to go back into lockdown, we would go right back to our data and say what happened when it happened the first time. And so with that, I'd like to thank our presenters today, Jeff and Sean Bell. Thank you so much. And for those of you on the phone who might be interested, or on the line who might be interested, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out either via phone or email to Sean Bell after this, and she is going to filter through our questions. So thanks again for your time. Really appreciate your commitment to the 30 minutes today. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.